I never imagined I'd be sitting here telling this story, but that's exactly where life brought me. If you'd asked me a year ago, I would have sworn nothing like this could ever happen. Yet somehow it did, and now I'm left dealing with the fallout all by myself. I'm Natalie. I'm 31 years old, and honestly, figuring out where to begin is harder than I expected. But I guess the only way to tell it is from the beginning. My husband, Ethan, is genuinely a good man. He's hardworking, dependable, and he's always stood by my side no matter what. Even so, somewhere along the way, I started feeling restless inside, like something in my life was missing. It wasn't some huge crisis or anything dramatic. It was just this quiet feeling that kept growing. Ethan and I had been married for almost 10 years, and together we were raising two amazing kids, our daughter Lily, who's 8, and our son Owen, who's 5. I loved my family more than anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd somehow lost the woman I used to be. Then, completely out of the blue, I got a message from Tyler, my college boyfriend. We hadn't spoken once since we graduated, so seeing his name pop up on my phone caught me completely off guard. He said he just wanted to catch up, and I figured there couldn't be any harm in that. It had been years, and we'd shared plenty of good memories back in college. So I answered him, and before long he mentioned he was throwing a birthday party in California. Then he surprised me with an invitation. He told me he'd pay for everything, my flight, the trip, the whole weekend. He even said I could stay at his place while I was there. At first, I thought the whole idea sounded a little strange. But the more I thought about it, the more tempting it became. A weekend away from work, responsibilities, and everyday life actually sounded kind of amazing. I kept telling myself I deserved a little break. I never mentioned any of it to Ethan. It wasn't because I believed I was doing something terrible. I just knew exactly how he'd react. He would have said it wasn't appropriate to spend time with an ex and probably would have brought up the example we'd be setting for our kids. But in my mind, none of that applied because I wasn't planning to do anything wrong. We were just two old friends reconnecting after years apart. That's what I kept telling myself. Instead, I told Ethan I was going to spend the weekend visiting an old sorority friend. It sounded innocent enough, and I figured he'd never question it. To make the story more believable, I even acted like the trip had come together at the last minute because she happened to be in town for an event. It felt like a harmless little lie, nothing major in my eyes. When I boarded the flight to California, I couldn't hide how excited I was. Tyler had covered everything, so I didn't have to worry about paying for a hotel or even arranging a place to stay since I'd be staying at his house. It all felt incredibly easy. Ethan didn't make a scene before I left. He kissed me goodbye and told me to enjoy myself, but I caught a look on his face that stuck with me. It was subtle, like part of him wasn't completely convinced everything was exactly as I'd described. The weekend with Tyler started out exactly the way I'd imagined. We spent hours talking about our lives, grabbed drinks together, laughed about old college memories, and wandered around the city. The chemistry between us was still there, I couldn't deny that, but I kept repeating the same excuse in my head. I wasn't doing anything wrong. Every time I caught myself wondering if I was crossing a line, I'd remind myself that I was simply having fun with an old friend. We were just catching up after years apart. Deep down, though, I knew those excuses weren't the whole truth. There was something I refused to admit, even to myself. Don't get me wrong, I never boarded that plane planning to ruin my marriage. I wasn't looking to make a decision I'd regret for the rest of my life. I truly loved Ethan. But after we had a little too much to drink on Saturday night, everything changed. I still can't explain exactly how it happened. There wasn't some grand plan or conversation leading up to it. Things simply got carried away. The truth is, I didn't stop it. Maybe I should have. But I didn't. When I woke up the next morning, I felt absolutely awful. I couldn't even stand thinking about what had happened. Instead of facing it, I convinced myself it was just one stupid mistake caused by too many drinks. I told myself I had only been blowing off steam. Tyler never brought it up, and honestly, I didn't want to either. I decided the weekend was over, and the only thing left to do was go home and move on with my life. When I landed back in Chicago, all I wanted was to get home to my kids, my routine, and everything familiar. But something felt completely different. I couldn't explain it, but walking into my own house almost felt like stepping into someone else's life. Ethan was sitting on the couch watching television when I came inside. The look he gave me wasn't warm at all. He didn't speak right away, but the tension in the room was impossible to miss. "So, how was your trip?" he finally asked, his voice completely flat. "It was fine," I answered, doing my best to sound relaxed. I acted like everything was perfectly normal, but inside I knew it wasn't. The atmosphere felt heavy, and I had no idea what to say. It was obvious something had changed. This wasn't just Ethan being tired or quiet after a long day. Something was bothering him. I could tell he was upset, but I couldn't figure out why. As far as I was concerned, I hadn't done anything wrong, right? I tried changing the subject, asked about the kids, and filled the silence with small talk, but none of it worked. Ethan barely reacted. He simply sat there looking at me with an expression I couldn't understand. The silence between us felt endless. Finally, after what seemed like forever, he looked at me and quietly asked, "Natalie, what really happened this weekend?" My entire body froze. It felt like every drop of blood disappeared from my face. Somehow, he knew. I had no clue how he'd figured it out, but somehow he already knew. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. I was so wrapped up in my own little fantasy that I completely missed how obvious my behavior had become. It didn't really hit me until later that night. Ethan was lying beside me in bed with his back turned, pretending to be asleep. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still awake. As I scrolled through my phone, a text from Tyler popped up. It was late, and I was exhausted, but I couldn't resist opening it. The playful way he joked with me reminded me of our college days, and reading his message stirred up feelings I'd been trying to ignore. For a moment, it almost felt like California hadn't ended. His message looked innocent enough if someone else had read it. But I suddenly became aware that Ethan was lying only a few feet away. The room was completely silent, yet the tension between us felt overwhelming. I should have realized how risky that moment was. Instead, I sent Tyler a quick reply. A few seconds later, my phone started ringing. Without thinking, I answered. "Hey," I whispered as quietly as I could, hoping Ethan wouldn't hear me. "I miss you," Tyler said without hesitation. "When am I going to see you again?" I didn't even realize my own voice was getting louder until I heard movement beside me. Ethan shifted in bed. His body stiffened just enough to make me wonder if he'd been awake the whole time. My heart started pounding. I'd spent the entire weekend avoiding the reality of what I'd done, and now I was practically exposing everything myself. "Shoo," I whispered nervously. "Not now, Tyler. Please." Ethan never said a word. But somehow his silence felt louder than anything else in the room. Even with his back turned, I could almost feel him staring straight through me. I ended the call as quickly as I could, flipped my phone over on the nightstand, and tried to pretend nothing had happened. But I already knew it was too late. The mood in the room had completely changed. Ethan didn't say a single word for the rest of that night. I expected Ethan to bring up the phone call or the texts that night, but he never did. He stayed completely silent about it. Still, I could tell by the way he acted that his mind was working overtime. Little by little, he was connecting the dots. The next several days were even more uncomfortable. Ethan started asking random little questions that seemed harmless at first, but every one of them made my stomach tighten. "Did you use airline points for your ticket, or did you put the flight on the credit card?" he asked one evening. I brushed it off like it wasn't important, telling him it didn't matter, but every question made the guilt hit me a little harder. Looking back, I should have realized what was happening. He was figuring everything out. He was noticing all the little details I thought I'd hidden so well. Even without accusing me directly, he was slowly piecing the whole story together. Then the bank statements came. Ethan always handled our finances. Every month he'd sit down, go through the bills, check the balances, and make sure everything looked right. That's when he noticed something. He didn't confront me immediately, but I saw the expression on his face while he stared at the computer screen. The second he realized there wasn't a single charge for a flight to California, I knew I was in trouble. A couple nights later, while sitting at the kitchen table with the statements spread out in front of him, he finally looked at me. "Natalie? Yeah? You never paid for a flight to California." I forced myself to stay calm. "What are you talking about?" I asked, pretending to be confused. "She offered to book the flight herself. I never paid for it." Even as the words left my mouth, I knew they sounded weak. I didn't even believe my own explanation. Ethan certainly didn't. He slowly raised one eyebrow and studied me for a long moment, like he was weighing every single word I said. "Maybe I just overlooked the charge," I muttered, trying to steer the conversation somewhere else. "I don't know, maybe it showed up differently." It was a terrible excuse. Ethan wasn't naive. At that point, none of my explanations meant anything to him anymore, and I could tell he was running out of patience with all the lies. Another few days passed, and the atmosphere inside the house became unbearable. Ethan wasn't openly accusing me of anything, but I constantly felt his eyes on me. It seemed like he paid attention to everything I said and everything I did. Every conversation felt like walking through a minefield. Then one evening everything finally came crashing down. Ethan casually asked if he could borrow my phone. At first, I didn't think twice about it. I handed it over without hesitation. But after a few seconds, something about the way he was holding it caught my attention. He wasn't using it to make a call or check something simple like he'd claimed. He was searching through it. He opened my email and found the airline confirmation along with the boarding pass I had forgotten to delete. I stayed quiet at first. I convinced myself he'd hand it back in another minute and everything would be fine. Then I saw him stop scrolling. His forehead creased as he focused on something on the screen. He never looked up, but I knew he was reading. My stomach dropped. "Everything okay?" I asked. My voice came out much higher than I intended. I tried to sound relaxed, but I already knew exactly what he was looking at. "I'm checking something," he replied shortly. A second later, he lifted his eyes and looked directly at me. There was something in his expression that I couldn't even describe. "Are you absolutely sure there's nothing you want to tell me, Natalie?" Every bit of color disappeared from my face. I wanted to explain. I wanted to deny everything. I wanted to come up with another lie. Instead, I just stood there staring at him. Deep down, I already knew. He'd found it all. Without saying another word, Ethan handed my phone back. That was enough. He'd seen the messages. He'd read the texts. He'd seen Tyler's name over and over again. He knew about the calls. He knew about every lie I'd told. At that moment, I realized there wasn't any clever explanation left that could save me. Everything was falling apart. Ethan stayed completely silent after giving me my phone back. The room felt painfully still. It looked like he was trying to process everything he'd just discovered. But I wasn't ready to give in. I wasn't going to confess. I'd gotten myself out of difficult situations before, and I convinced myself I could do it again. There was no way I was going to let him think he'd won. Not after everything I'd done for our family. Not after all the sacrifices I'd made over the years. I kept telling myself this was all just one huge misunderstanding. I could still fix it. As I looked down at my phone, I remembered the newest message Tyler had sent before Ethan took it. "I miss you, babe. Can't wait to see you again." I deleted it immediately. But it didn't matter. Ethan had already seen it. He kept staring at me with that cold, unreadable expression. I could feel my face burning. My heart was pounding so hard it almost hurt. All I could think was that I needed to stay calm. I couldn't lose control. "Natalie," he finally said, his voice much quieter than before but full of disappointment, "are you really going to keep lying to me? I went through your phone. I saw the messages. I found the flight information. I saw Tyler's name everywhere. And I heard your phone conversation." Panic started rising inside me. But I refused to let it show. I wasn't going to let him corner me. "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied, forcing my voice to stay steady even though my hands were trembling. "I've already explained this, Ethan. I went to visit an old college friend. That's all it was. You're making this into something it's not." Ethan took a long, slow breath. It looked like he was struggling to keep his anger under control. "You're still lying, Natalie. You went to see Tyler. You flew across the country to be with him, and now you're standing here lying right to my face. And the worst part is, you don't even seem sorry. You seriously expect me to believe this was just an innocent little trip?" His words hit me hard. I felt embarrassed. I felt angry. But I still refused to back down. "I'm not lying," I shot back, folding my arms across my chest. "I didn't do anything wrong. Why are you making such a huge deal out of this?" I needed to get away for a while. I needed to reconnect with someone who actually understands me. "You just don't get that." Ethan's patience finally snapped. "Are you listening to yourself?" he shouted. "You lied about where you were going. You lied about who you were with. You lied about why you left. And now you're trying to tell me that I'm the one who doesn't understand? Oh, I understand plenty. Probably a lot more than you think." I was breathing hard by then, trying desperately to stay composed. I couldn't believe he was reacting this strongly. To me, it had just been one trip. I kept convincing myself that I hadn't really done anything terrible. If I could only make him see it that way, maybe everything would settle down. "I honestly don't know why you're freaking out," I said, lowering my voice to sound calmer. "Yes, I made a mistake by lying. But I didn't do anything wrong. You're seriously overreacting." Ethan didn't answer. For what felt like forever, he simply stood there looking at me. It was almost like he was waiting for me to finally understand what I'd done. But I wasn't ready to apologize. Not for this. Not for something I kept telling myself wasn't that serious. Finally, without saying another word, Ethan turned around and quietly walked out of the room. I told myself Ethan was finished talking, but deep down I knew he wasn't. I could hear him muttering to himself from the other room. I even caught bits and pieces of what he was saying, but I convinced myself it didn't matter. I figured he was just angry. I kept thinking he'd cool off eventually. But he didn't. I heard drawers opening and cabinets shutting in the living room. For a moment, I assumed he was packing a bag to leave for a few days. Honestly, I wouldn't have blamed him. I'd acted like a complete fool. Even then, though, I still wasn't ready to admit how badly I'd messed everything up. Not yet. A few minutes later, I heard him pick up his phone. At first, I didn't pay much attention. Then I heard him dialing a number. The second it clicked in my head, I froze. My heart felt like it stopped. Ethan was calling Tyler. I knew exactly what he was doing. As the phone continued ringing, a cold wave washed over my entire body. I wanted to yell at him. I wanted to stop him before anyone answered. Instead, I just stood there, completely frozen. I couldn't make myself move. All the guilt I'd been trying to ignore came crashing back at once. Ethan barely said anything during the call. "Tyler?" Ethan asked. "Yeah, who's this?" "I'm Ethan. Natalie's husband." There was a long silence. Then Tyler let out a slow breath. Even so, I could hear enough of the conversation to understand exactly what was happening. He wasn't guessing anymore. He was asking Tyler for the truth. He wanted answers. and Tyler was giving them to him. That's when reality finally hit me. This wasn't another fight between husband and wife anymore. This was the end. When Ethan walked back into the room, he looked completely different. His face had lost all its color. His eyes were colder than I'd ever seen them. He never raised his voice. He never yelled. But the anger behind his calm expression was more frightening than any shouting could have been. "You still want to keep lying to me, Natalie?" he asked quietly. "You still expect me to believe you didn't fly to California to see your ex? You want me to believe you didn't spend the entire weekend with him? You got on a plane without telling me. You stayed in his house. And you're seriously going to keep pretending none of that happened?" It felt like the walls were closing in around me. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to say something, anything. But I had nothing left to stand on. Ethan already knew everything. Tyler had confirmed it all. Even then, I still couldn't bring myself to admit it. "I didn't do anything wrong," I shouted. Honestly, I wasn't even sure if I was trying to convince Ethan anymore. It sounded like I was trying to convince myself. I needed a break. I needed someone who actually understood me. Someone who wasn't you. You never listened to me, Ethan. You were always working. You were always focused on the kids. I just wanted to feel alive again. Ethan looked at me like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "So your answer was to run back to your ex?" he asked. "That's what made sense to you? You couldn't sit down and talk to me? You couldn't tell me you were unhappy? Instead, you lied. You cheated." A lump formed in my throat. "I didn't cheat," I insisted. "You don't understand. You really don't." Ethan stared at me for several long seconds. Then he slowly shook his head. The disappointment on his face hurt more than his anger. "Oh, I understand, Natalie," he said quietly. "I understand more than you realize. You already made your choice." It felt like all the air disappeared from the room. I couldn't breathe. My thoughts were racing so fast I couldn't grab onto a single one. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to run away. Part of me wanted to somehow undo everything. But I couldn't. I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Ethan let out a long, exhausted sigh. "I can't live like this anymore," he said, almost whispering. "I can't keep pretending our marriage is fine while you're doing things like this behind my back." In that moment, it felt like a door slammed shut on the life I'd always known. I wasn't really surprised when Ethan finally said he wanted a divorce. Deep down, I'd been expecting those words. Still, hearing them out loud hit me harder than I ever imagined. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. For a second, I wanted to argue. I wanted to beg him to stay. I wanted to say anything that might change his mind. But deep inside, I already knew. I'd gone too far. "You made your decision," Ethan repeated, his voice steady and emotionless. "And I've already collected everything I need. I have the flight records. I have the text messages. I have Tyler's number. I'm done pretending none of this happened." I didn't even try to fight back. There wasn't any point anymore. I'd lied. I'd betrayed him. I'd destroyed the trust between us. Looking at him hurt more than I expected. The man who had once loved me unconditionally was now looking at me like I was a complete stranger. "I'm sorry," I whispered. The words sounded empty the moment they left my mouth. Sorry for what? Sorry because I'd been caught? Sorry because I'd ruined everything? Sorry because I was about to lose my husband and my family? Ethan barely reacted. His eyes looked exhausted. His face was empty. "You're saying you're sorry," he replied quietly, "but you still don't understand. You have no idea how much I sacrificed for this family. And you threw all of it away for one exciting weekend with your ex." I wanted to break down. I wanted to erase everything I'd done. But it was impossible. The lies couldn't be taken back. Neither could the betrayal. And deep down, I knew Ethan would never look at me the same way again. "Don't call me," he said. "Don't try to fix this. I'm filing for divorce. I'm going to fight for full custody of the kids. You'll have to deal with the consequences of your own decisions." I couldn't answer. My throat felt completely closed. My stomach twisted into knots. I had destroyed my marriage. I'd betrayed the one person who had always stood by me. Ethan turned around and walked away, leaving me standing there without saying another word. Eventually, I collapsed onto the couch. My thoughts were spinning. My heart felt completely shattered. None of this was how I imagined my life would end up. When Tyler first reached out, I'd convinced myself it would all be harmless. I believed I could handle it. I was wrong. Desperate for something to hold on to, I called Tyler. I thought maybe he'd have the answers. Maybe he'd actually want a future with me. Instead, the man who answered sounded like someone I barely knew. "Natalie," he said flatly, "I don't know what's happening with you, but I can't keep doing this. I thought we had something. But after everything that's happened, I'm done." That's when reality finally sank in. Tyler had never been the solution to my problems. He wasn't some great love story waiting to happen. He was simply another mistake. I'd tried to use him to fill a hole inside me. Now he wanted nothing to do with me. I kept texting him. I kept calling. I sent message after message, hoping he'd answer. He ignored every single one. With each day that passed, it felt like another piece of my life disappeared. Weeks went by. I found myself sitting alone in a house that used to be full of laughter, conversations, and family. Now it was painfully quiet. The kids were staying with Ethan. Honestly, I couldn't blame him. He'd always been the stable one. He'd always been the person our family depended on. Now he was moving forward without me. I had plenty of time to think. I thought about every lie I'd told. I thought about how I'd traded my marriage for a brief rush of excitement. And now I had nothing left. No Tyler. No Ethan. No family. I'd burned every bridge I ever had. The hardest part was admitting something I didn't want to face. Even though I felt guilty, I still wasn't sure I'd fully accepted how wrong I'd been. I kept trying to rebuild my life. But nothing fit together anymore. Ethan was moving on. There was nothing I could do to stop him. For the first time in years, he was finally free from all the lies I'd wrapped around our marriage. And honestly, he deserved better than what I'd given him. I'd dragged him into a disaster he never asked for. By then, it was far too late to repair any of it. Tyler was gone too. He'd seen me for who I really was. I couldn't even blame him. He belonged in my past. I'd convinced myself he could somehow become my future. Instead, he walked away too. That left me with nothing except regret and the silence that followed every decision I'd made. I'd lost my marriage. I'd lost my family. I'd lost the person I used to be. By then, apologies didn't matter anymore. Ethan had already chosen to move on with his life. Tyler had done the same. In the end, I was left alone to face the consequences of every choice I'd made. Looking back now, I guess I ended up exactly where my decisions led me.